Today we have a very special Philosopher and the Monk podcast. We have a very special guest, RJ.
Yes, today we do have a special guest, Chuck Hillig. He's a modern spiritual teacher. He is an author who writes about the essence of non-dual spirituality that is understandable to the average reader in ways that are totally unique, completely accessible, and absolutely life-changing. He's also, which is incredible, a licensed psychotherapist, which I hope we could speak about that a little bit later. I've seen some amazing talks on the sand conferences and Buddha at the gas pump. And James, you know Chuck a little bit beforehand, or?
Yes, when I saw Chuck's latest talk at SAND, which is the Science and Non-Duality Conference, that talk just spoke right to my heart. It was like hearing myself talk. It was so perfect, especially Chuck, well, first let me run through some of your books. Enlightenment for Beginners, one of my favorites, Looking for God, Seeing the Whole in One, and the book actually has a hole. Do you have it there, Chuck?
Probably.
There's an actual hole in the book, a hole in one.
That's great.
Representing the void.
I've got one of the earlier editions, but there it is.
Oh, that's great.
See, there's the hole right in the middle.
This is a family podcast, Chuck.
Okay.
and then Seeds for the Soul, The Way It Is. And then I was wondering, Chuck, this one I really like. Maybe we could talk about later. I don't have the book, The Magic King. I read about it. Is it still in print? Can we still get that one?
Yeah, it's for kids ages 3 to maybe 7 or so.
Okay.
But essentially it's the story of enlightenment for beginners, but it's couched in terms that a child of that, between 3 and 7 would be able to connect with.
Right. And I like it seems to be setting up that this is all a divine play. All a dream, right? It's a beautiful way to do it. So I thought a good way to start at that conference, my favorite line of yours that just stopped me. I pulled the car over because it was so potent to me. And I wrote you about it, was when you said, first you talked to the crowd and you knew every move they had already made. You knew that they read all these books and they maybe experimented with some astonishment medicines and they've meditated. You knew everything. And then you said, and don't worry, you're thinking who wrote the Upanishads, who wrote the Gita? And you said, you wrote them. You wrote them. And that was so how I feel. So maybe we can start with explaining to people what does that mean that right now there's 3 of us here, but really only 1?
Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to me to see how people talk in terms of like Buddha or Nisargadatta or Ramana Maharshi and talking about them as if they were separate people, historical people that lived in the past, that had a childhood, that grew up, that, did this and that and wrote this and that, and then they finally died. In the era of actually considering them to have been real people, it's very easy then to transpose that and to consider yourself as also a real person too. But you are not a real person. You are not a real person. You never were, and they weren't either. See, all teachers and all of their teachings have arisen from within the heart of who you are. You are the source of all of this. It comes out of you. And you have created these historic figures that have shown up in your play to give you some kind of handholds some kind of signpost in the past that you can cling to and maybe work from and anchor your life out from. But they weren't people, and you're not a person either. To disidentify yourself as being a separate person, I think is a really important step.
Definitely. So you're saying we laid our own breadcrumbs out.
Well, again, there really is no we here.
Right.
There's no we, there's no our, there's no they, there's no us. There's just you pretending to not be, that whole complete, seamless, unbroken oneness, the unicity of life.
Right. Pure consciousness or pure imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the person with the ego who we think we are is just like conditional, or you could say, what's Paul's word I like?
Paul's word?
Yeah. Not conditional, but
I know what you mean. No, I'm not sure. I can't think of it right now. Provisional?
provisional. Would that apply to what you're saying? Like Schopenhauer would say, we have like a double identity. Like the first is like the one eye of the world that looks through all creatures, the I-ness, the core subjectivity of all beings is who we really are. But we also have a body, like which is a representation of that core subjectivity. So it's kind of like dual, but the only one that really does exist is the first one, the one eye of the world that which all creatures see through. That's the ultimate reality. And then there's like a conditional reality that comes from the ultimate reality, which is us seemingly individual creatures, of which we're not inherently that. But so that's that's the game. That's the, would you, well, not call it a game, but that's the double identity.
Well, I like what Ramana Maharshi said. He said that the whole thing is just a great game of pretending. The oneness pretending like it's not the oneness. In order to experience itself, you could have that as a reason, but just to experience the separateness and the duality in that pretended separation, the dream world unfolds. It really shows up through the antipodes, the right, the wrong, the good, the bad, the hero, the villain. All of those polarities get played out on the stage that you have set up. You have to really own this. You have to own your own dream. And that means recognizing that what Buddha said was really quite profound. He didn't say that you are the source of your world. He said you are the source of the world. With your thoughts, you create the world. He didn't say with your thoughts, you create your world. It's a big difference.
Yep, and
You
Jesus
are
said
creating
you are
the world through your thoughts. Your thoughts have created this.
Jesus said you are the light of the world. That fits.
Well, yeah, I like again what Rumi said, something about, he said, why do you weep? Why do you weep? He said, the source is within you and this whole world is springing up from you. It's springing up from you. Everything and everyone that you have ever seen, that you are experiencing right now, emanates from within the core, the heart of hearts of who you are right now. It's a fantastic mystery that just, it'll take your breath away and then it'll give it to you again.
Definitely. Our teacher said it's the only game in town, and I heard you say the same thing. It's the only game in town.
Yeah.
And the message is all as well. But do you have any favorite pointers for people that can't, they're seeking, but they can't quite buy what you just said? They can't hear it yet. It's still a little locked. It sounds fantastical to them.
It is fantastical. And In King Lear, written by Shakespeare, there's a great line by Edgar, the legitimate son of Gloucester, and he said, ripeness is all. Ripeness is everything. If you're not ripe to hear it, it'll just be water off a duck's back. And you get what you get. It's there. And think of your own past in the books that you've read and the experiences that you've had and the people that you've talked to. And maybe years, even decades later, you go back and you see those people again. You have similar conversations. You may even read the same books again. And all of a sudden you have a different opening from those very same words that you had read, 15, 20 years ago. You're going, wow, how come I didn't get it back then? Well, ripeness. You weren't ready to hear it. It wasn't time for you. You get what you get, and you're always on schedule. You've never lost your way. You're always on time. And really, like James said, all is well. There's nothing to worry about.
And do you, in your therapy or when you give talks, because ripeness is all, but a little sun, a little water, right? Maybe you could turn the hose on yourself a little bit and and make sure there's some sunlight. You're not hiding under a tent or something in a cave.
There are, if you're talking about the shadowy energies within us that we have to acknowledge, is that part of it? You don't want to do any spiritual bypassing. You want to look at all of sides of you. I'm very much of a Stoic in that philosophy. One of the phrases that they use in Stoicism is amor fati. Amor fati.
That's my favorite.
Fati, yeah, it translates into like an acknowledgement of an embrace of the fate or the path or the destiny that you're on. To look at what's showing up on your path and not only to like it, not only to choose it, but to love it exactly the way that it is. Not changing one about it, not modifying it in any way, just saying an enthusiastic yes as your default position. You make yes your default position to whatever shows up without understanding it, without insisting that you figure it out or have to do something with it. No, you just look at that and you go, yes, not yes, I'm just going to cope with it and tolerate it and put up with it and, kind of roll my eyes. You choose it vehemently and enthusiastically, and you love it exactly the way that it is without understanding it, without demanding that it show up in a certain way, in a certain pattern. Just being with that and putting your arms in a sense around it, bringing it right into your heart, because that's where it came from anyway. But you re-own it, you own it, you claim it, you claim it.
Chuck, one day ago, I pulled that up for a girl that I know, Samantha, and it just shows how in sync we are. Just one day ago, so she'll be watching. She'll be watching. RJ, did you have you had some questions?
That amor fati from I think that's credited to sometimes to Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah.
And his idea of eternal recurrence, where I like what you're saying, Chuck, a lot, because it's like not just love your fate, but Nietzsche's thought experiment of the eternal recurrence would be love it so much that you could do it for eternity over and over and over and over again and still love it every time. That's how much you should love this. What's happening.
Yeah. And I use kind of that also when I talk about being in the present moment. Can you be so much in the present moment that if you did nothing else the rest of your life except this, if you just kind of froze yourself in time and just sat there without having any forward momentum away from this moment into a next moment, in the hopes of having some kind of clarity or or sanctification or satisfaction or something, but that this moment was so whole and complete unto itself that there was no place else for you to go. You were just fine with that. To live your life each and every moment like that would be paradise, because then whatever was showing up would be not only acceptable, it would actually be loved by you. You would be loving every nanosecond of this, and you wouldn't be leaning forward into the next moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And that's like when I hear the mystics and sages say, in the immediate moment lies eternity.
Yeah.
I love that, because it's like you could search for, let's say we live for 100 years and we're searching for truth or happiness, whatever, but it's in less than a millisecond that everything's realized in the immediate present moment. I think that's fantastic. I really like that. Very well said.
I found it helpful to just literally stop the world and to freeze everything in my life, to sit there without thoughts, without feelings, with certainly no movements whatsoever, including breathing. And there's an opening that shows up in those few seconds when you're not breathing, you're not thinking, you're not moving, and just to widen that, the more that you practice that, and just it's an astounding thing, because that's where it is. No movement, no thought, no feeling, nothing at all, just nothingness, just the beingness of you.
Which
now that might scare people when they hear that a little bit, but we're saying it's the most blissful, beautiful, joyful thing there is on here, and it's the reason you're here.
What scares you is who you think you are, not who you really are.
Right.
Yeah.
So Chuck, based upon what you said, do you prefer certain techniques to realize that? Is there things that people should do or shouldn't do, or is it?
I'm not really big into shoulds and shouldn'ts. I think, people, they all happen from this. So I think people ought to do what they feel is what they need to do. It's like, I don't have very much success at night when I'm dreaming about people, to go up in the dream and say, you're just a figment of my imagination. You're not real. Well, they're not going to really take to that very much. A lot of them will resist it, and some of them may even try to crucify me.
Sure. Who would like to hear that? No one, right?
So when you started, I guess in the 60s somewhere, what was your story? You were always probably interested in psychology or the mind, and did you experiment a little with the medicine, or did you read Ramana Maharshi? Like what pulled you in?
Pain.
Suffering.
Pain. I had been raised a Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school with the Sisters of St. Joseph. I went to a Catholic high school with the Dominican priests. I went to a Catholic university with the Jesuits. I was deeply steeped in all things Catholic. And when I was about 21, 22, just ready to graduate from the university, I had kind of a falling out, and recognized that the questions that I was asking of myself and of my teachers, they were giving me answers that were not satisfying my heart. It did not resonate with me anymore. So I went into what amounted to kind of a dark night of the soul that lasted for several years. I was married at the time to this Catholic girl, and she was, very Catholic. She went to sleep with a statue of Mary in one hand and a rosary in the other. This is really deeply steeped. And she did not like it when I began to be dissatisfied with the Catholic Church. But at that point, I was lying through my teeth. We had kids at that time, and I'd go. She'd go to a church on Sunday, and I'd watch the kids, and then she'd come back and watch the kids, and I'd go ostensibly to go to church. I just got the New York Times and went out in the park and read the newspaper, and she'd come back, or I'd come back, and she said, "What was the sermon like?" And I said, "Well, he talked about love, you know." And so I just was lying through my teeth. I was inauthentic. I was lying and uncomfortable and in a lot of pain. Someplace along the road, it was in New York, I remember, and I had been told by a friend of mine, "You've got to read this one book. This one book is amazing." And they told me the name of it, and I didn't think too much of it. And about a week or two later, I was in a bookstore in New York, and I was walking down the aisle, and right there, facing me, was this book. And I was going, "Wow, this is interesting." So I took the book out, and it totally changed my life. And you want to know what the name of the book was? Of course, it was Siddhartha, the old classic Siddhartha.
I just read it again. I just read it this week.
A day ago.
I just read it.
Finished it yesterday.
You're killing me, Chuck. You're killing me.
Is that synchronicity?
That's two.
Is that a coincidence?
So Siddhartha, and then from that point, I started to read everything I could on Eastern philosophy, on Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and Zen. And then I went back, and in 1970, somebody pointed me to the feet of Ramana Maharshi. And I went there. I read what had been written about him and his talks. And where else could I go after that? So I've been a devotee of Maharshi for 52 years.
Wow.
And it's just transformed my life. I mean, there was no place else to go. I didn't even know the word Advaita or non-dual or anything like that. It was just, but there was something in what he said and how he said it. And looking at the pictures, it was just, that was it. It was like, all right, I'm not going to go any place further than that.
I remember you wrote.
Before that time, I was into astrology and tarot and I Ching and numerology and crystals and all this stuff, because I was living out in Hollywood and in California. And before that, I was living up in Haight-Ashbury. I was one of the hippie dippies back then in the late 60s. And then, of course, down in LA, got involved with pot and hash and the usual stuff like that.
Do you know where we came from? As far as I was a student of James Randi's. I don't know if you know.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So we're coming from, RJ and I are, Rich and I are coming from the real skeptical materialist background, and to break out of that took some medicine a little bit, to really break through. Because Randy was like a god to us, and Richard Dawkins and Asimov and Sagan and all the big materialists,
Yes, I can imagine.
And then one day, one of my heroes turned around and said, "Randy's wrong. He's not skeptical enough." He said he buys into that matter is real, that the world is solid, and that it's not consciousness, that consciousness comes out of matter, not that everything's consciousness. And that sent us going within. That did it. And then we found you.
Right on schedule.
Right. I was going to ask you, you said one of your favorite quotes, I think Maharshi said, was the answer to life's problems is first to see who has them. That's such a great.
Who has those problems? Who is the one that says, who is the one who says, I have a free will? Who's this I in that sentence?
Right.
My thoughts, my feelings, my words, my actions. Who is this I that wants to claim ownership over the thoughts and feelings and words and actions? Go there, but that takes the quest away from looking out into the external dream world and kind of turns your eyeballs around to start looking within to see who is there. Is there anyone really there?
Right. We had read Douglas Hofstadter, who became a good friend, and Hofstadter, since we were teens, we read him, and he was saying there is no self, and Daniel Dennett was saying there's no self, but we had never, we knew that they were right, but it was just it was just words. We never experienced that shift until many years later, going, in meditation. That was the only way to actually experience no self, not to just know that maybe there is no self or believe.
Yeah, there is no separate self. Self is just, Maharshi often used self, capital S, as a way, put an equal sign between that and consciousness. The self, right. Not the separate self that we think right. we are, but the self that is, that really is, that you are.
Yeah, that threw us off years ago. We were reading the Hindus, and they were talking about the little self and the big self, and we had only known there is no self, so we didn't understand. Then we figured it out, just the words.
Yeah, all non-dual analogies are fatally flawed. Sooner or later they'll work for a while, and then they just kind of fall off the cliff. And they fall off the cliff because they're being shaped by words, and words are inherently dualistic by nature. And so there has to come a time when you just come up to the edge of the emptiness, leave the words there, and then just dive off into that nothingness with nothing to cling to, and certainly no words to give you any kind of solace and safety.
James, important to note, our heroes like Douglas Hofstadter, James Randi, and them, who said no self, one thing we realized afterwards is they were saying no self, but still believed in material and physicality, yes. Fundamental. And that was another, so that little self and big self, that was a big deal for us.
Yeah.
Because it was just no little self and the world was physical.
Right.
That didn't work out so well. There's an implication of no self.
Right.
That leads to a further realization. Right, Chuck?
Well, you can almost begin to overthink too much of it. I like analogies of the dream. I like the analogy of the movie screen that like your character moving around on the screen, and but the character on the screen is not going to awaken to the screen. It's just not part of what they do.
Right.
The screen awakens to the screen, but the screen is already awake. So the screen has no desire for any kind of awakening. It's only who you think you are that wants to awake, because that's the part that thinks I don't know something when it really does. But it's all this wonderful game. And, for me, I like to have fun with it. I laugh a lot. I am always laughing. If you watch me on Facebook, I'm always cracking jokes and making snappy, snarky remarks. I have fun with it all. It's important to have fun with it. I mean, it's having fun with you. Might as well have fun with it back.
Right. And laughter is like a temporary loss of self, that self feeling,
Exactly. Yeah. We have to be an appreciative audience. I have to be an appreciative audience to my own psychodrama. All this stuff that shows up. So I can look out in the front yard and see the trees and cars going by and stuff, and I can appreciate each and every one of it. I can marvel at it. I do. I go, wow, look at that. It's a green car. Look at these leaves quivering here in the breeze. That's amazing. And it is. So if I live my life out in a state of constant astonishment, just constant astonishment, go, wow, look at this. So it's not so much like living in the now, it's like living in the wow. Look, it's a miracle.
Yes.
It's joy.
And I like that you say that, you can have a teacher or a guru, but eventually you start to realize that the world is I remember when we realized that the world was our guru. Everything is teaching. And it's really, I think you say it in a certain way that it's the pure imagination waking itself up in a way. It's its own guru. It's its own. So that's the game it's playing. It's teaching itself to remember somehow. I don't know how to word that. But.
No, consciousness turns out to be its own guru. But it's playing like it's not, and that's fine. And I'm just blown away by the beauty of it and the chaos of it too. I don't think people enjoy the chaos as much as they could, because that's part of it. It's like the the old saying about the bumps in the road are part of the road too.
And it also sometimes like I always say, suffering is like a rumble strip on the road that bumps you back onto your path. That it pokes you when you go a little too far this way, or squeezes you, it shakes you, brings you back.
Well, suffering to me is very personal. Suffering is more psychological. Pain, on the other hand, is physiological. It's of the body. Suffering is of the mind, because the suffering is identified to some kind of level of attachment, personal attachment. I am suffering. So that's that. I separate that from the pain of the body, the suffering of the mind. That's more voluntary, I suppose. You can really create that up there, but the incarnation, a certain amount of pain is going to come in with this incarnation. There will be pain. Some things just have to be endured in life.
That Buddha quote, I'm sure we all love it. Pain is certain, suffering is optional.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Suffering is really, it's ego-based. It's ego-based because there's an ego that's attached to it, thinking that this is happening to me. I'm being victimized by this, by someone, by some event, by some person, or something else out there. Then the suffering comes in.
I think, remember that quote RJ Nietzsche said, same guy with the Amor, is it Fati?
Fati?
Yeah. Is it
Amor Fati?
Fati. Nietzsche also said, to anyone that I adore or I like, I wish them the most horrible suffering, the most terrible pain, the most heart-wrenching loss, and he goes on and on and on. And at the very end, he says, because they can show then that they do what is most important, that they endure through that. So it's not a happy non-dual quote, but it's a good one.
Well, consciousness wants to experience, it wants to feast on the feast of what is. The feast of what is, and that includes being a victor and being a victim. Being a king and being a pauper. It wants to swing from one extreme of being the agony to the ecstasy. It wants the whole range of what's on the table of life, the feasting table of life. It wants to participate in all of this. Never says no to it. It just says, this is all the stuff here, and I want to experience it. It just wants to swallow itself, because all of the things on the table, that's itself. And that's why I like the great image of Ouroboros, the snake that's swallowing its own tail. And when you think about it, it's swallowing the tail, spelled Tale, the tail of who it thinks it is.
Oh, it's perfect.
It is, until it disappears, and that's part of it.
That's perfect. RJ, I think you had a free will question.
One question I would have is, when you say consciousness wants, to do this or do that. Are you saying like consciousness has a plan, like a pre-planned idea of what it wants to do before it does it?
I don't think it has a plan, and maybe want is not the word that I want. But it's like there's like just like an energy that that has a momentum to it somehow.
Yeah.
And we're going, and consciousness, in order to keep itself separate, has to act as if where it's not at is better than and more important than and more interesting than where it's at right now. So it wants to make this where it's at somehow wrong and where it's not at somehow right. So that provides a momentum for it to then move towards that space.
I like that.
In the moving of it, it's able to continue the delusion that it's not over there in that space by pretending that it's not over there. So that helps it to keep separate, to provide the juice and the momentum and the justification for thinking, hey, I'm not that, because why would I go seek something that I already am? So I have to pretend that I'm not there, and then I can go on over there and do that. So it's all pretense, but that saying what's present, what is not as good as or important as what isn't. In that pretension, in that separation, although it doesn't really exist, in that pretension, that provides a reason or a justification to then move over to someplace else, which is that's really the dynamic force of how the dream world unfolds.
That's why I love Schopenhauer. He's one of my favorite philosophers, because he says that what you're saying. He says it's we have evolved to metacognize, like meaning evolution has given us the ability to know that we're doing something, not just doing something like an animal. We know that we're doing it, and that's a metacognitive ability that has evolved. But consciousness itself, or universal consciousness, or the one mind, or pure awareness, whatever word Brahman you want to give it, doesn't have that ability to pre-plan and metacognize. It's more instinctual, it's more intuitive. So the way the world is coming out is through an instinctual process where it goes where it feels right, or where harmony, let's say something happens in the world, there's a harmony, and not that it likes it, but it's intuitively
is drawn like a pull.
Yeah, it's down with that harmony, because it's right instinctly.
Like
then
water,
we metacognize and think about it and discuss it and analyze it, and that's where things go wrong. But I like what you just said, Chuck, because that's in line with Schopenhauer. It's not pre-planning, it's instinctual. And consciousness is trying to figure a way out to make itself in this manifestation of consciousness itself, a pairing, a harmony, something that goes nice together. I don't know. What do you think? You any thoughts on that?
It's one of my favorite quotes by Schopenhauer is, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills.
Yes, that's the answer to free will. That's it right there. Einstein liked that quote too. And that's, I was going to ask you about free will, because it's like, let's say you have a decision to make, and you have materialists out there that say you have no decision, you have nothing to do with it. Your choice of doing it is already pre-planned. But let's say there's a decision and there's like 10 or 15 or 20 options. You can go left or you can go right. You can go up, you can go down. You can go eat a hamburger or you can eat a hot dog. You can do that. So those options that come to you, you have no choice in what those options are. But you do have a choice in choosing one of those options that came into your field of awareness. So I love that idea of Schopenhauer's free will. We have it, but we don't have it. It's a tricky question, by the way, right?
Let me ask you this, RJ. Do you think that in the play, in Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, do you think that Romeo and Juliet can freely choose to commit suicide or not?
Which is, I think, one of Camus' most important questions that there is, to commit suicide in that. As a side
So
note.
do you think those characters can choose?
Do I think the characters can choose? The answer would be no. First thought, like initially, the answer is no, because human beings are not actual things, entities unto themselves, and they're stuck in the causal chain of existence. So in that way, everything, like what's going to happen 10 years from now is done already, right? Because if you trace back the cause and effect, you could see that it has to happen. So I would say with free will, it's yes and no. We have it, but we don't have it. But what would you say about Romeo and Juliet falling in love?
Well, from within the context of the play itself, if you, RJ, are Romeo,
Mhm.
and you really believe you're the character Romeo,
Right.
you've never been RJ, you've never been anything else. You are, in fact, Romeo. Do you have free will? You think you do?
In that sense, no.
Oh, you don't think that you would have free will within the
Not,
context of the play? If
like
you
if
were the
it's,
character, Romeo, a real life character named Romeo, in similar circumstances, could you actually choose?
I think we could choose the variables that are offered to us, but those variables that came in, we can't choose. Does that make any sense?
I don't know. What do you think,
James,
James?
you have any
Or
opinion?
I would like to think that Romeo can go sit under a tree and realize he's Shakespeare and he wrote the and figure the whole thing out, and then he can rewrite maybe.
Well,
Or
here's where I'm going with all this is, it's like, so the characters experience the consequences of their behavior within the context of the play, like uh, the people that betray Othello.
right.
Is the character who plays his part, is he punished at the end of the play, or just the character that he's playing is punished? At the end of the play, only the character is punished.
Right.
It's not the actor who's playing it.
Right.
Right.
At the end of the play, the actor who's playing it just takes off his costume and makeup, goes out and has a beer with Othello,
Right.
and Desdemona. But within the context of the play, yeah, he's kind of trapped into that.
Mm-hmm.
But so maybe are you living some kind of cosmic play? It
I think
seems
so.
like you have all these choices, and maybe you really don't. Maybe
Right.
nobody else does either. So you're not reading. It's not like you're painting freely on the white canvas of your life. Maybe you're really only painting by the numbers.
I like that.
If you're painting by the numbers, then there is no such thing as improvisation. You're not improvising. Nobody else is either. Every single word, every single gesture, every single phrase, every single action has all been determined before the Big Bang. If you want to put it, using the linearity of time, everything's planned. Let go, take your hands off the wheel. Everything will unfold exactly as it does.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine
It's
with that. I don't know if RJ is.
It's like the story of a man in a little tiny wooden boat in the biggest storm in the sea that we've ever seen in history, and he's steering the boat, and he feels like he's turning it and steering it, but he's really not. He's just going along with the waves in the storm, but he feels like he does have free will, but he
Mm-hmm.
really
I remember when I was a young boy and I was sitting in the passenger seat of my father's car. And as a toy, they had one of those little steering wheels and they had a suction cup on the side. And so I could pretend like I was steering, and my father would be steering left and I go left, and then he'd go right and I go right. And I had the image that I was controlling it all.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's kind of interesting. And
Baron,
You weren't controlling anything though, right?
nothing at all, no. But I
Baron,
had that image that I was doing it because I was going through the motions.
Baron de Holbach, the French writer, wrote about a fly that was on a string hanging off the carriage, and it was flying in front of the carriage, and it thought when the carriage went right or left, it was going right. It was its choice, but it's attached to the carriage. So that's a funny.
So are you guys saying that free will come when you find out who you really are? Is that what you guys are saying?
Free will is an illusion. It's like seeing the analogy that I use is like when you go to the desert and you look out and you see the mirage of a lake, and you go, oh, that's a lake out there, and then after you kind of hang on a little and you go, wait a minute, that's just a mirage, that's not a real lake. And when you discover that, you no longer expect that mirage of a lake is going to satisfy your thirst, right? You recognize it's not real water.
Right.
Or you said
there's no real lake to, you can't go determine what the water temperature is of that mirage, the lake mirage. That lake mirage has no water temperature because there's no water there. So if there's no water there, likewise, it's just like there's no separate person here at all to be either having or to be not having a free will. There's no separate person to have that attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's got one and nobody doesn't have one. There's no free will to even, because there's no separate person. There's no separate self.
Totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. James, it's like our conversation we had when you would say, everything is done already. It's over. Like that, the destiny, it's already done.
It's done.
But I would say to you, remember what I used to say to you all the time? I would say to James, yeah, but we don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
And you can't know. So that's that. So who really cares if it's destined? Because the next moment you don't know how it's destined. Right. So it's you, even though it may be pre-planned, but how is it pre-planned?
And that gives people anxiety.
That
gives them anxiety. And that's when Kierkegaard says anxiety is the freedom, is that dizziness of freedom. And they have anxiety. What's going to happen next? And they want to control things. And,
like if God told you, don't eat the apple, that's very, you're going to have anxiety over deciding to eat it or not, right?
Anxiety is telling yourself scary stories about something that's not present. It's all happening in your mind about what could happen, a nanosecond down the road. But in truth, your body does have a destiny, but who you really are does not have a destiny. Who you think you are, your body does have a destiny. I mean, it's not going to have a happy ending. I mean, you're going to end up in some sick bed and fading away. I mean, that's we're all waiting in death's waiting room, but who you are has no destiny at all. It had no beginning, no ending. It's just infinite. So it depends on, if you want to say, oh, this is who I think I am, okay, then you'll be attached to your suffering and you will have that destiny.
One of the Sufis said, just based on what you were just saying, you have to come to this, like you said, this beautiful, joyful nothing that's always waiting. The entry point is right there, waiting for you all the time. But the Sufi said, either you come to it now, or you go to God on a stretcher. Either way, you're going home. You're going to go to the morgue, or you're going to come to this. Oh, can I ask you just a quick question
sure,
about
sure.
grace? I'm always thinking about that when I talk to RJ. What's the role of grace? Is it just, how would you explain grace to someone who's hoping there's something that could help them?
It's like a lifeline or something, right? You're swimming in grace all the time. Grace is always present.
I like that.
And who knows? You know, you could say maybe you deliberately attract pain and create suffering for yourself in order to trigger the grace either in yourself or in other people as a result of that pain, that suffering. So there's a process going on here, and I'm not, quite sure what that is, but I think it's all somehow related.
Right. I think you said once that the bad will come, but did you ever notice how good you feel, how much goodness comes after that? Many times, you go through a very hard time, but after that, the beauty that comes, we forget about that, how beautiful everything turns around lots of times.
Yes, we go from the agony to the ecstasy, and somebody once said, if you want to go to heaven, a lot of times you first have to go to hell.
Right.
Did you return to your, I was raised Catholic also. RJ was raised, luckily, more secular and Buddhist. There were those kind of books around the house, but I was Catholic, and I'm having a lot of fun returning and looking at the Christian mystics and Meister Eckhart and Marguerite Porete and Saint Teresa and all of them. They're saying, it's so clear now. It's so beautiful and clear. And Father Richard Rohr, Nondual priest, that it's just so nice to return to it and correct it. Did you do that? Because I don't remember that much in your writings, but I know you like Meister Eckhart.
Meister Eckhart, one of my favorite sayings of Meister Eckhart was, he said, everything is meant to be lost so that the soul can stand alone in unhampered nothingness.
I love that. And again, that sounds to, like my sister, very scary.
Well,
emptiness.
It's scary if you think that there's something there. There's something that you have to cling to. So there's something that you are. But when you let go of thinking that you have this body, you have these thoughts, you have these feelings, you have these words, you have these actions, that none of that is yours. That's not you, and that's not yours. It's not you, and it's not yours. In that letting go, you're just free falling into, the emptiness that you actually always were. I mean, your emptiness is so empty, and you can get this with plant medicine. It's empty even of its own emptiness.
That I like. That's
your favorite, Nagarjuna, right?
Yeah. It's very good.
Yeah, I quote him in one of my books. Yeah.
So
See,
James
sorry.
and I say that Jesus and Buddha were more similar than different. Would you agree with that, Chuck?
Well, remember, Jesus and Buddha arise from within your heart. You have created them. They're not separate. They're not people. These are energies, spiritual energies, luminaries that you have peopled the stage of your life and refer to from time to time. But they have arisen within you and they disappear within you. They all come and go within you. The world does. The world all appears within you. Every night when you go to sleep, you collapse the world into yourself, into the singularity that you are. And then in the morning, you just recreate this whole thing. And get trapped and snared and entangled by all of your connections and relationships and all of that. The attachments are the things that keep you connected to the dream world, not your involvement. You can be involved with and yet not attached to.
Mhm.
And that's where the freedom comes in. It's not to become detached from the world. Oh, I'm far above this, kind of a spiritual bypass thing. No, that's missing the point. You're 100% involved with all the stuff of the world, with your kids, with your mortgage, with your boss, with, the bridge club, all of that stuff, you're involved with it, and you're not attached to any of it. It's the attachment that causes the entanglements, that causes the suffering.
That is the whole thing. I am 100% with you on that, Chuck.
Yeah.
Like you could have problems and be involved with them, or you could view them like you're in the eye of a hurricane. The problems didn't go away; they're still there, but you're not attached to them.
Yeah, in it, but not of it.
Yeah, I love that, Chuck. Very excellent. That was very good. Excellent. I agree with that.
I thought this morning in meditation, it was like a lot of people are paratroopers, but they're clinging to the door. The air is open. They won't make that. They're still holding on to that. It's almost like a cocoon plane, and they're the butterfly. They won't go out the door, and it's too much. It's too big,
Fear?
too boundless.
A lot of fear?
Yeah, a lot of fear.
Because
That letting go.
Because when you think you're the individual, there's more fear. Is that right, Chuck?
Yeah, I kind of liken it to you're in a bright room and you come to a door and you open the door and there's nothing but blackness out there. And should I step into the blackness? Or what about this light here? It seems more comforting. And you get the courage to kind of, step into it, and you try to close the door, and there's still light coming in. So your eyes can't adjust to the dark yet. So you're halfway between. You got
That's
some
good.
light there, you got some darkness there, and you're kind of, but it takes this final courage where you shut the door and you sit and just be with that darkness, that blackness, that emptiness, that fear of nothing else. Nothing's there until, sometime down the road, your eyes become a little bit more used to the darkness, and then possibly you can see a light way over there in the distance. You go, oh, okay, and start heading in that direction. But you cannot see the light as long as that door is still even slightly cracked.
Mm.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. I like the idea that courage is essential in waking up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. It is. It takes a lot of courage. Yeah. And I think that's what, hang on, phone call there. Yeah, courage. Courage to let go, courage to be who you already are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's like climbing Mount Everest naked in a snowstorm. That's scary. And not everybody can get up there. It's too, even though you're already at the top, it's too, some like to stay at the bottom of the mountain and they're more comfortable there.
Well, it's interesting with the analogy of the mountaintop. Some people say it's easier to go from sea level and start into the foothills, and then you're at base camp, and then you start going up the mountain, these different camps, and finally you're at the top. By the time you get to the top, your body is acclimated, your psyche is acclimated to actually doing that, as opposed to being at sea level and dropping, a lot of acid or something, and just all of a sudden zooming to the top, it can become extremely disorienting. And you get all discombobulated, and it becomes pretty a freaky, uncomfortable experience, as opposed to a slow opening of yourself into these new higher realms.
That's why we recommend MDMA.
Well, you asked Chuck before about psychedelics, and if I can go back to that for a second.
Sure.
To me, a psychedelic, Chuck, I don't know if you agree with this, but a psychedelic will, if you do it the right way, with the right setting, of course, it could maybe show you the true mental space or the real consciousness, like very briefly, but you didn't discipline yourself, or you didn't practice, or you didn't have certain things in you that will make it last. So it's like a flash of experience. Is that any good? Like, does that do any good, or is it no good?
I remember when I was a boy and going and getting these Cracker Jack boxes, and you'd get these little tiny balloons as a toy, as a prize. And they were very small, and you would blow into them, and it would take you a hell of a hard time. You'd have to really blow a lot, and finally you got it to go up a little bit, and then a little bit more, and maybe you expanded it to as much as it could, and then you let it out, and then you tried it again, and each time you did it, it was a little bit easier to get to that expansion.
Like that.
And I think that's what the proper dosage of plant medicine can really do for you. It helps to expand that, so that when you do go into deeper meditation, those are not foreign territories for you anymore.
Right.
You've been there. You recognize that. And that seems to be helpful. I've had MDMA, and I've had 5-MeO DMT, and they're marvelous tools, I think, properly administered. But again, ripeness is all. You got to be ripe for it, because it'll just blow you away.
Two questions for you, Chuck. Number one is 5-MeO DMT the strongest psychedelic on earth? And number two, would you not know something without it? Like, did it show you something you probably couldn't discover on your own without it?
That's good.
Well, first, I do think it's the strongest psychedelic on earth, 5-MeO DMT. Yeah,
I've heard that.
I don't know. It showed me something that I had a degree of familiarity with. It was not like foreign to me, but it was such an expansive experience that I can close my eyes and kind of get into that emptiness. And there's this great quote by, it was like Emperor Wu asked Bodhidharma. He says, Bodhidharma, he says, what is the most holy truth? He asked that of Bodhidharma, and Bodhidharma just said, vast emptiness, no holiness.
Ooh.
No holiness, just vast emptiness.
No holiness.
Is that the same emperor who asked the Bodhidharma who he was, and the Bodhidharma responded by saying, I don't know? Is that the same?
Yeah, I think it's the same one, Emperor Wu. Yeah, W-U.
Yeah, Emperor Wu. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also discussed how the emperor would gain no merit by building these Buddhist temples.
Right.
You remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Hey, Chuck, can I ask you one thing? I wanted in the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned you wrote a book for 3 to 7-year-olds, and that's very.
It's called the Magic King.
The Magic King.
Magic King, right?
I was I think the last podcast we had, I was saying that I heard Sadhguru. You know who he is, right?
Yeah.
He said something that in India, before they learn ABC and 1, 2, 3, they're taught that they are the whole universe. They're not an individual being, and then they learn the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Is your book kind of like that in a way? Because that's fascinating that you wrote. Can you explain a little more? The children.
Well, I wrote it in 1982, something like that, long before, decades ago. And it was just a way of putting the book Enlightenment for Beginners into a message, into an outline that could be understood by kids, because it told a cute story about a king who had all the powers in the world, but he was bored, and so he wanted to pretend that he wasn't this and he wasn't that, and he created all this. And the long story short was that he got so interested in what was going on, he went down there and started being as his creation, and then forgot that he was that creation and got lost in his own story.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
One of my favorite stories is the guy who climbs the mountain looking for the guru. He gets to the top, he finally gets there, and there's the guy with the big beard. And he says, I heard you said life is like a dream. Can you explain it to me? And the guru is sitting there and it says, can you just get me a glass of water from the town down below? So he has to go back down to get the guru a glass of water, and goes in the bar to get the water, falls in love with the barmaid, and has a family and kids, and he's living a happy, happy life. And then one day a fire comes and devours the town and takes his kids and his wife, and it's just about to burn him up. And he wakes up at the top of the mountain, and the guru says, and that's how it's like a dream.
I had heard
Just
that
like that.
before.
I like that.
But it's interesting that I didn't hear it like it was a guru on a mountain, but it was actually, I believe, and somebody can correct me if they know another story, it was part of a Vishnu. Vishnu was involved with that. Vishnu was the one when one of his devotees, disciples said, tell me the nature of Maya, and he said, oh, well, fine, well, go get me a glass of water. And that whole thing, that exact same scenario where he went over there and got married, and had kids and became wealthy and had everything taken away from him and stuff. And then he was growing down, and his hand was disappearing beneath the waves, and suddenly he felt this strong hand pulling him up. And there he is standing before Vishnu again. And Vishnu says, well, where's my glass of water?
That's great.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a dream. It's a dream. But just because it's a dream doesn't mean it's not going to be a nightmare from time to time, right?
Right. Just stay awake. Be lucid, as lucid as you can.
But throw yourself into this dream, because why go to Disneyland if you're not going to ride all the damn rides?
Right.
Ride them. Have fun with this. I mean, all of this is there for your edification. It's there as a gift to you. And like I said before, to become an appreciative audience to your own creation, to revel in it, to marvel at it, because it's all being presented to you. Don't go, it's no big deal. It is a big deal. Everything is a big deal. Everything is just wonderful. It's just marvelous to sit around and go, wow, look at this.
But you would recommend first wake up and then do that, right?
Well, remember, there's no separate person who's asleep. Who you really are is not asleep. Who you think you are is pretending to be asleep, yes, but who you are is no interest in awakening.
Only
who you are is an interest in awakening.
How would someone understand they're not an individual being, they're really the whole cosmos? Do you have any techniques you like to show people how to understand that and realize that, or just do it whichever way it feels good for you? I don't know.
How much success have you had in your dreams at night telling the characters that you meet that they are really only figments and that they are not real, that they're an illusion? I bet you haven't had very much success. Look to yourself first. That's the only thing that's going on here. Your awakening is the world's awakening. You can only awaken to your own dream. All of these others are appearing in your dream. And part of your dream is they may or may not awaken in your dream, but it's still your dream. Your dream is the one. And that's the one that you can awaken to. Awaken from, hear the word. You're not going to awaken from the dream. You're going to awaken to the dream.
In the
dream will still go on.
Right. You'll just see through it or be
Yeah,
aware of it.
it's like lucid dreaming, you know.
Yeah.
You'll still be
Yep.
paying your mortgage, you'll still be dealing with your kids and your nasty boss and all that stuff. But now it'll be more of a dance thing. It's
Right.
like you're in a 5-act play, and in the third act, you suddenly get, oh my gosh, I know how this whole thing's going to end.
Yeah.
Now, just because you know how it's going to end doesn't mean you would then, therefore, get out of having to read your words, read your lines, do your action, do this and that and that and this. You're still going to have to go through each and every thing that's required of your character that you're playing out. You can't fast forward it, cutting right to the last line of the fifth act. You're going to have to go through all of it, but you're going to be experiencing all of that very differently. It'll be more like a play, but you'll weep and wail and gnash your teeth, but you won't be attached to that weeping and wailing and gnashing of the teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yeah. I could see how some people would misinterpret that as solipsism, but you don't mean that, I'm sure, right?
No, it's not solipsism. Solipsism is I'm the one that's all this has happened. No, you're not even there. Only consciousness.
You don't mean the individual. You mean universal consciousness is the only thing that exists.
Yeah.
The only thing. Consciousness is the only thing that is.
Right. Yes, and we are like aspects of or fragments of universal consciousness, but not separate segments, not separate fragments.
They're not separate. They're not separate because consciousness has no parts.
Right.
It has no edges. It has no boundaries. There's no moving parts and stuff on it. It's undivided. It's indivisible. It's one seamless unicity, and you are that.
Oh, you know what I like? I saw you speak somewhere. I totally identified with what you said. And someone asked you, Chuck, what is ultimate reality? And I loved your answer. It was everything, I'm probably going to screw it up right now. In every aspect of your life, when you were a child, teenager, adult, older, whatever that thing that was permanent throughout your lifetime, that's ultimately real. Everything else is not. I like that answer. That was a very good answer. You remember that? Do you remember that?
I don't, but sometimes I don't know where this stuff comes from.
It was like a back room at the SAND conference. It was just you and another gentleman, and it was one-on-one. There was no audience, but I think you just gave a lecture, and you were doing a one-on-one and that. But that was a great answer. Whatever's permanent about you throughout your lifetime is real. So now the question would be, what is it that is permanent about you throughout your lifetime? It's your awareness, your consciousness.
What is reality for me is that which persists unchanged in every state. The waking state, the dream state, and the dreamless sleep state. If it changes, it's an illusion. If it evolves or mutates or transforms in some way, it's all an illusion.
Right.
Look for what doesn't change. And like that which persists unchanged is who you are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly how you said it, too. That's perfect. James, you definitely agree with that. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I agree with everything he says.
Well, another question for you, Chuck. What is the love that sages and mystics talk about? What is that love? Because everybody wants to love someone, but what is that love that Rumi and them talk about?
Well, that's really who you are, though, RJ. Is loving itself. When love loves itself, this is what the dream world is. Love loving itself. What happens is the obstacles that show up that say, I know what love is, and I know what love isn't. Love looks like ABC, and it doesn't look like XYZ. And yet it's all love. To let go of your preconceptions as to what love should or must be looking like, that's greatly freeing in some strange way. And people are, maybe you'll feel uncomfortable with this, but if love is all that there is, love is going on right now between us, if you want to say us, but love is also going on over in Ukraine. It's all love. It's love, even though it doesn't look like love. Consciousness is always at peace, even when it pretends to be at war. It's always at peace, and it's always loving itself.
And when someone's blood starts to boil, hearing that, I could imagine someone just getting hot over the Ukraine, Russian. That's their separation. That's not, they're going to suffer right there, because they're going to feel like, oh no, they're separate people and they're getting hurt, and they don't understand this beautiful oneness that is playing with itself underneath the whole. It's the whole thing.
It doesn't mean that you, quote, shouldn't do something about it if you feel
Right.
so inspired. If you feel inspired to go and help and contribute and raise money and stuff, do it.
Right.
But the difference is you're not attached to the results of your efforts. You do what you feel compelled and what you feel inspired to do, and you let go of the results of it. But it's all only love, because there is no such thing as not love. There's no such thing as not consciousness. There's no such thing as not God.
So anytime it's not love, you have this feeling that you're not feeling love. You're being delusional, really. In a sense.
The love is there. Yeah, the love is
it's
always
there. You're just not seeing
grace.
it. Right.
Just like grace, love and grace, it's always present, because that's all there is.
So maybe good advice is for someone that's suffering, and they're hearing this and they're saying, but I'm not feeling that love. It's to start to look, and right under this is this endless ocean of love. It's right under that suffering, and you have to drill a little bit, or let go of things. What would you say? Let go, or be still, be quiet, calm, stop thinking.
I guess it has to do with just trusting that the love is present, and sit in that,
Right.
without arguing against it, without fighting and resisting the possibility that it's always present and that love is all that there is. Just say, all right, I'm just going to sit there and take the stand that all of this is love, and that there is nothing else except this, and just sit with that, and then to look back into my life from that point of view, and to see what insights might show up as a result of you saying, all there is love. There is nothing else other than that love, and just to be with that and see what shows up.
I like that. So you sort of translate the world from seemingly negative, you don't like this person, you don't like that person, and now you can translate it in the light of love and see, actually that villain was really helping me in this way, or that there was always, even the witch in the Wizard of Oz was writing surrender, Dorothy, surrender, but she ran from it. They were trying to wake her up.
All of the villains that you have in your life, the personal people that you're having issues and problems with, and relationships with your family and stuff, all of those, they have their origin within you. You have to own that. You own that. In the owning of that, in the loving of that, and the absolute embrace of that, then you're no longer resisting it, because the old thing, whatever you resist persists. It just goes on and on. But if you don't have that resistance, if you just look at it and be with what is, you be with what is.
I like that. You like that, RJ?
It's like you guys are saying, consciousness is love, but when you, I'll use Schopenhauer's terms. He calls the consciousness the will. So consciousness is love, but when you re-represent it, because physical world is the representation of consciousness or love, but when you re-represent it, then you get Hitler's and Stalin's. That's what you guys are saying, right? Once you re-represent consciousness, then you go off into a mental idea of separation and individuality and multiplicity.
Judgment.
You start to believe that's real. That's what you guys are saying, right?
Well, Hitler and Stalin and Gaddafi and Pol Pot, they all have arisen from the same source that you have.
Right.
Same source as Maharshi and Buddha and Christ. It's all one source. It's all coming out of the same matrix, the cornucopia of the universe.
Right.
It's all flowering forth just exactly as it is.
Correct.
Just exactly, for some strange reason, as it needs to be. I don't know why. I don't know why it has to be this way, and it is.
But something's happening from that cornucopia of consciousness. There's a re-representation happening where there's a belief system that just occurred, which is consciousness. I mean, because James and I, samsara is nirvana, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? So how is there evil? Because it's a mental disorientation. It's like a mental event of separation that causes you to behave and act in ways that are evil. But it all comes from the same consciousness. It is consciousness is love, and love is consciousness, but it turns out evil when you re-represent it in a way in your mind. Am I saying
well, the evil, is just an apparent evil, just like
right. Okay, I'm with you on that.
Is Macbeth evil? Is Hamlet evil? Is are any of these characters doing evil things, or are they required to do that for whatever reason? If they didn't do the evil, there wouldn't be this action. I mean, an author loves his villains every bit as much as he loves his heroes, because it's the villains that give the heroes the motivation and the reason to act heroically.
So can I be an awful person?
Those energies, that balance. Say again?
Can I hurt people and be awful to them and be evil just because I know that the universe must be balanced with good and evil, and I'm doing my part to be the evil one?
You mean you consciously?
You could do that, but then don't be surprised when people come along and cancel your vote, because they're going to say, wait a minute, real life or dream problems like you are going to be solved by dream solutions like locking you up for 20 years.
In a dream jail.
I mean, I believe we all are inherently good. I think the universal consciousness is ultimately good and only good. So, yeah. So if I'm going against that, if there is no bad, there's no universe, right?
I don't think the universe is inherently good. I think the universe just inherently is.
Okay.
And remember, there's no we here. There's just you, to
me,
really
me as universal consciousness, not the Richard.
You are that consciousness is all that there is.
But you see, it sounds like we need.
This may look like a dialogue. We're not having a dialogue. We're not having a conversation. What this really is this is one voice coming out of three seemingly different mouths.
It's a monologue, right?
Yeah.
But there's one voice here, whether that voice is coming from James or RJ or Chuck, it's one voice, even though it looks like it's coming out of three different mouths, but it's not. It's one voice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. With an illusion of separation.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I was just saying that, suffering is an illusion. It would have to be an illusion then, right?
Well, suffering is an illusion, but it still hurts.
Hmm.
It
But it
hurts.
never touches who you really are.
It doesn't hurt who you really are.
Right.
It hurts who you think you are.
So it's just burning away all the stuff that's unnecessary, in a sense. Maybe that's what the Christian hellfire is. It's burning away anything. It can't touch you. It can only burn away your attachments. It burns away your holding
Who
on.
you are not. Yeah,
Yeah,
it burns who you are not.
right. I remember I had a mushroom journey and I took a little too much, and when RJ and I take a journey, it's totally in silence, like apophatic. It's darkness, quiet, never recreation. And this journey blew the doors off everything. It was like I was on a ship in the middle of the ocean. There was the boards were ripping apart. There was nothing I could hold on to except I think I crawled into another room and I saw my cat, and the cat looked great, like a tiger, like a big blue tiger, very gentle. That was like the one constant. And then I said, well, I have my hands and it was like skeleton arms, and everything went, the house went, everything. And the only thing that kept me going was that little voice that said, like you were saying before, underneath all this, just hold it out. Just, I think you said, have trust that all is well. Like underneath this power is so powerful, but it's because I'm resisting it, and I am that power. And when I finally let it go, everything flipped into love.
Yeah. That's what happens with like DMT, with everything's taken away from you, and the ego just goes. And if you're not ready for that, it can be absolutely terrifying.
Right. 10 minutes.
Chuck, did you ever have a bad trip on anything?
I had a rough trip one time back in the 70s on some bad acid. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Did it teach you anything? The bad trip?
Well, to be careful about the quality of acid that I drop.
Okay. Why? What's the quality of it? Like, it was too good quality, or there was something else?
No, I think it had some speed in it or something. I don't know what it was. It was tainted in some way.
I got it.
Yeah, and I was alone at the time, and I probably should have dropped it with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck,
but
what
the
do you
best
think?
I had probably, I got some acid or some mescaline from Timothy Leary.
Really?
Wow.
I had interviewed him on TV once back in the early 80s.
Wow.
He's a very interesting man. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Totally.
And you tried you tried it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was wonderful. I had a very interesting experience with it. I was at Laguna Beach out in LA with a friend of mine, a girl, and we were with a friend of ours who was sleeping on the blanket about 30 feet away. This was late in the afternoon. He was sleeping over there, and this girl and I, we both dropped, and within an hour or so, we were looking out there, going, wow, this is really amazing. And then we both looked out over the water, and above the waves, we both saw the same hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
And the same hallucination was the face of our friend who was sleeping 20 feet away, 30 feet away.
Wow.
And but we both were struck by the countenance of his face. He looked very sad. He looked very mournful almost, and not at all happy like we had known Dave. And so we thought, wow, that's kind of weird. So anyway, we slowly came out of it. We went on back to, I was living in Silver Lake near Hollywood. And about 3 days later, I got a phone call from Dave. And he sounded really bad. He sounded just awful. I said, David, what happened? And he said, my brother died.
Mm.
And it was his twin brother, and he died at the same hour that my friend and I had seen his face above, above the waves.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's powerful evidence right there. Now, as a skeptic, I would have thrown that out in 1 second, but now I know it's true. It's all true.
There's one thing going on.
Yeah, one thing going on. Do the math.
That's a good one, Chuck.
I like that. And I like that you call it plant medicine, not drugs or, plant medicine. We're trying to, I call it astonishment medicine. What do you think of the words non-duality or idealism? Do you like these words, or do you ever try to change the words around a little bit?
Well, yeah, I like non-dual better than Advaita. Advaita sounds kind of, foreign and what's that? But non-dual, that kind of does it. What I do like about Advaita, though, is how they translate it as not two. Advaita means not two. They don't even say it's one, or not one, or whatever. But not two seems to fit. But words, all of this dualistic world, any time you use an analogy or words or description, it'll just take you so far, and then you just have to let go. And that, in some ways, I think that's kind of what organized religion is. Organized religion, I kind of envision it to be like encampments that have been set up kind of around this huge void, kind of like just imagine a big hole in the consciousness here, and all these different encampments. And there's the Christians, and there's all the Protestant denominations, and there's the Jews and the Muslims and Hindus, and they all have their different encampments, and they all try to lure people into their encampments and start, indoctrinating them. But they just go so far. They can only go so far. But they're all really right up against this void. And what's necessary, I suppose, is who's going to jump off? Who's going to be free falling into that nothingness with nothing to cling to on the way down? They can't cling to self or memories or dreams or reflections or beliefs or expectations or hopes or theories, any of that. You just have to let go of all of that stuff and just free fall, and you never hit bottom. It's just free fall. You let go, let go, let go, and then let go of letting go. That has to go too. There's nothing there, and in that freedom, that's that moment. That's that moment that is all moments, every moment.
And that's the mystics and the sages swimming in that empty pool in front of the religions, right? I think, was it Joseph Campbell who said the mystic swims in the same water that the psychotic drowns in? Something like that.
I like that. Yeah, I remember that.
That is good.
And
that's another word, like mystic. It just sounds too mystical to a skeptical ear. It's, it
sounds out of touch, like, oh, that's somebody else. I can't possibly attain that. But that's that. Then they put themselves on that ladder of spirituality, where there's people above you like Nisargadatta and Maharshi and Buddha and Christ, and people below you like Hitler and Gaddafi and Pol Pot and those people down there. But you put yourself on that ladder in the hopes of attaining some kind of, one or two rungs up the ladder to where the spiritual luminaries might be. But that whole paradigm just collapses because you're not on a ladder. You're not on that ladder at all.
The caste system, what is it?
Caste system?
Yeah, that's ridiculous, isn't it? We're all one being or one existence. How is there a caste system in Hinduism?
Well, it's that desire to somehow go on a spiritual path and a belief that somehow where I'm at is not as okay as where I could be. And all I have to do is go over and sit at the feet of this guru or read these books or meditate, for 3 days with Eckhart, or all these different strategies in order to gain a little bit more vertical height on this ladder of enlightenment that I'm climbing. But you can't. Believing that you possibly could is part of the thing that needs to be let go of. You can't get more to a place where you already are. You are already there. You are already consciousness. You can't get more consciousness.
Right. That's why the caste system is ridiculous to me, because it's like, how are you born into, an undesirable, or what's the word? The lower class in Hinduism?
So
the untouchables.
untouchable. Yeah.
Right. Like how, so you're born into that. No, if we're all one and your realization happens to come, you're just as much a Brahmin as the Brahmins are, right?
But it's hard to let go of the idea that the spiritual enlightenment bus that you're waiting for is just not going to show up.
Because you're already in the town. You're already there.
Somehow there's
you.
something that I need to do, a strategy. I'm a seeker. But as long as you are on this quest, then that happiness and that enlightenment you're acknowledging is not present here and now, that it's out there, it's around the corner, it's up in the mountain, it's over in India, but it's not where you're at. You have to go search for it. And that's dualism loves that. I mean, consciousness loves to pretend that it's not fully awake. And Maharshi used to say that. He said, the greatest obstacle to enlightenment is getting past the delusion that you're not already enlightened.
Yep.
I love that.
You are. I mean, that's all there is this. It doesn't get any better than this. But if you think that it does, then you go on the search. But the end of the seeking will mean the end of the seeker.
And that feels like death for that little bit until you pop through. You got to let go.
That's why I think for the Western people in America and other Western countries, I think idealism is very good, because with our materialist paradigm that we currently operate in, it's nice to see a philosophy that shows it's one mind or one consciousness, like in Western terminology. That's what I like about idealism. It's idealism to me is the Western version of non-duality.
Can you define it for a second, just to?
Do you agree with that, Chuck? I'm sorry, James.
Well, tell me how you're defining idealism.
Yeah, just define it, just to make it clear.
Well, materialism or physicalism or scientific realism, whatever way you want to call it, at the bottom level of reality, there are physical, solid, independent entities like subatomic particles. And if these entities are arranged in the right way with enough complexity, mind or consciousness emerges. Matter is the ground of reality outside and independent of us. Idealism is saying the ground of existence is mind or consciousness, and everything else is a vibration of consciousness. So consciousness is not a thing. It's not an object. It's pure subject. And every physical entity in the whole universe is what the vibrations of consciousness look like to sentient beings when they perceive it or observe it or measure it. So in that way, it's very conducive to non-duality, correct?
So you're saying a solid object's more like a ripple on a lake rather than a solid, something that's totally solid.
I'm saying it's exactly like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes. So
just an appearance.
Everything you see and experience is a ripple on the lake of consciousness. Exactly correct, James.
Right.
I like the way
Like,
Let me ask you this then, RJ. Oh, where does the world go when you're not directly experiencing it?
so I'm an avatar right now. Like Richard RJ is not an actual being. So what happens when I die? Is it what you're asking?
Well, when you're not, for example, you're not in your car right now. Does your car even exist?
Oh, I see where you're going. Yes, it does exist, but not
And
as a
you know
physical
this
thing.
how? And you
Not
know
as a
this.
physical. I'm
How do you
sorry?
know it exists? How do you know it exists? How do you know it's there?
How do I know that something exists?
When
That
you're
you
not
can't see.
experiencing it directly.
I know it's not a physical thing that exists when I'm not observing it. Physics has already proven that. I don't have to go out on the deep end to say anything in regards to that. So,
So
physicality,
the world has an independent existence, or an existence that's independent of your observing it.
absolutely not.
Oh,
100%
it doesn't.
opposite of that. The exact opposite of that. Right.
Okay, so you have to
the world,
observe it or else it doesn't exist.
the world only exists when a conscious observer is perceiving it. The
Like,
physical world
and you
only
have to
exists.
be the observer.
Right, but there's no physicality at all unless it's being observed. So, example, the moon does not exist when it's not being observed. The form and the colors and the structure of the moon are not present when no one's observing it. But does the moon exist? Of course it does exist, whether I'm looking at it or not.
But you're talking about no one. What about you? I mean, suppose you're not experiencing that. Does the world exist when you personally are not experiencing it?
Right. See, that's the fantastic thing about idealism. It's like you have subjective idealism, which is our relation to physical objects in the world, just like I was explaining how it only exists when you perceive it. But there's an objective idealism, which is our relation to the one mind or the one consciousness. What you're saying, how we don't exist, how we're really the one consciousness and not the individual self that appears to exist. So it's like in idealism, it's like a combination. This is my interpretation of the non-duality relationship with idealism, that it's a combination of subjective idealism and objective idealism. So yeah, absolutely. There's no physical object unless you're looking at it. And what's also happening, you're the one mind pretending to be this individual self at the same time. So in that way, it's very analogous to non-duality, but I like it because I live in America, and a lot of people in America obviously are Western people, and to wrap their heads around non-duality is very difficult. But if you start to just deconstruct materialism and show that the physical world is not actually real, I think that's what when we first started, this guy Paul came to us and said, prove to me there's no dream, that this universe is not a dream, prove it to me. And I said, I have a degree in philosophy, I went through Descartes. There could be an evil genius deceiving us and the world. But when I really tried to figure it out is when I found the answer.
He asked RJ, where does the stuff from the Big Bang come from? How do you get a rock out of empty space?
Right.
And that's what sent him.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in that way, I would say idealism for the Western person is a good tool to understand what you guys are saying, how consciousness is pretending to be a human being and that the universe is not actual because it's not a standalone existence. It doesn't have independent existence. So in that way, I think it's a good tool for people trying to wake up to spirituality. See, because when I first started understand I'm not a person, I still couldn't wrap my head around that there's a physical world I'm a part of, but yet there's spirit in the world. It didn't make sense to me. But if I flipped everything around and said, oh, everything is mind, everything is consciousness, and everything else physical is just how consciousness appears to me when I observe it. Now I have my oneness. Now I have my wholeness. And then I can go into Nisargadatta Maharaj and Ramana Maharshi and Buddha and understand better what they're trying to say about the world. Does that make any sense, Chuck?
That's great. Well, I'm glad that works for you. And if you had much luck in talking to other people from that approach.
Well, I don't mean me. What I'm trying to say is any Western person who started out their life believing that there's a real world and we're a part of it and there's a world outside of your mind, that takes a long time to understand that it's not like that. Because every waking moment, when you look at the world, you see separation. Every second, I could have the most incredible psychedelic experience and realize everything's one, everything's consciousness, everything's God, everything's awareness, wholeness, unified. And then the very next morning, I'll wake up and I'll say, there's a cup, there's my car, I got to go to work, I got to do this, but there's this and that. But it's like, how can you grok the idea that everything is mental? And I think idealism will help you with that. And that's not just personal. I think anybody who grew up with a Western materialist paradigm, to see through it, I think you could use reason and logic to initially see that, okay, don't go down this materialist path. This avenue is wrong. Materialism as a standalone existence, apart from my mind, cannot be true. Okay, so let's eliminate that path of materialism. What's left over? Idealism. You guys with that?
Well,
You with me or what?
So I'm supposed to go to a birthday party in about 10 minutes. So I have to.
That was the best answer.
Here. But remember the population of the dream world is only one.
I agree.
Not two.
I agree.
So all these
Suzuki said not two. I think it was him that said that, right? Okay.
So all these other people that we're referring to, other people that aren't awake or are awake and stuff.
Seemingly other people. Seemingly.
Yeah, it really, to own that and to say all of that stuff, all of these stories, all of these dramas, they have their origin within me. Within my heart of hearts. Not the heart of hearts of RJ or Chuck or James, but the core matrix of consciousness itself. If
Your
it had a core matrix,
like your core subjectivity.
It's
Right.
it's all. It has its birth, its origin from within that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And all of this is a manifestation of it.
Correct.
And
I
the
agree.
conversation that we're having is just one of we're just having fun. We're just dancing.
Could not agree more.
There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just you say what you say, or I say what I say, but it doesn't mean anything. In the end, all of this stuff is just emptiness. And the truth of what we're really pointing at only lies and can only lie in the empty space between the words. In that emptiness between the words, that silence in there, that's where the truth really is.
I agree.
But meanwhile, it's been totally fun talking to you guys. You guys are great. I've appreciated so much that you invited me, and I don't get a chance to do this very much, and I thank you.
We thank you, Chuck. This has been a long time coming, and I'm glad that maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road.
All right. Well, I'll be around, I'm not sure, but who knows?
We'll see what happens.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Love you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.